The gavel hadn't fallen yet, but Dr. Renata Kessler already knew how this ended. She could read it in the way Chairman Gerald Ashcombe squared the folder in front of him, tapping its edges against the table like a man setting a trap before checking that the jaws still worked. 12 years of trauma surgery had taught her to read a room the way she read a monitor. Vitals first, threat assessment second. And the vitals in this conference room were bad. 6 board members. A hospital attorney with her pen already uncapped. A security guard posted by the door like this was a courtroom instead of a credentialing hearing. Dr. Kessler. Ashcombe said, not looking up from the folder, "We have some questions about the 2 years missing from your file." Wren folded her hands on the table. Steady. The way she held them over an open chest cavity. "I've answered those questions in writing 3 times, Mr. Chairman." "Then you won't mind answering them a 4th time," Ashcombe said, and finally looked up. In front of everyone. Gerald Ashcombe had chaired the credentialing committee at Ridgeline Memorial for 11 years, and in that time he had built a reputation as the board's conscience. The man who caught the sloppy paperwork, the padded RA summaries, the surgeons who cut corners on their way up. He believed, sincerely, that hospitals didn't die from bad outcomes. They died from bad oversight. And he had built his entire second career on being the man who provided it. He also believed, just as sincerely, that Renata Kessler didn't add up. "Let's start simple," Ashcombe said, sliding a printed page across the table toward her. "Landstuhl Regional Medical Center, Germany. Advanced Trauma Fellowship, according to your credentialing file, completed over a 26-month period ending 4 years ago. I had my assistant call Landstuhl's records office last week. He let that sit. They have no record of you, doctor." None. A ripple went through the room. One of the younger board members shifted in his seat. "I was there," Wren said evenly. "Then you'll understand why I find that hard to believe, given that the institution has no record of your enrollment, your rotations, or your attending supervisor." Ashcombe's voice hardened into something almost gentle, which was worse than shouting. "I've seen this before. Someone builds a RA Some on a foundation that sounds impressive and unverifiable, and by the time anyone checks, they're 3 promotions deep and operating on people who trusted a piece of paper. That's not what happened." "Then tell me what did happen." He spread his hands, inviting her, almost kind. "Where were you for those 26 months, Dr. Kessler?" Wren held his gaze. "I can't tell you that." The silence that followed had weight. Ashcombe nodded slowly, as if she'd just confirmed something he already suspected, and made a small mark in the folder. "You can't," he repeated. "Or you won't, both," Wren said. "It's not information I'm authorized to share." Authorized. Ashcombe let the word hang in the air like it was faintly ridiculous. "Doctor, this is a licensing hearing, not a diplomatic summit. You don't get to invoke authorized, the way other people invoke the Fifth Amendment." He turned to the room. "I want to be clear about what's actually at stake here. This hospital's insurer requires verified credentials for every attending surgeon. If Dr. Kessler's fellowship cannot be verified, and as of this morning, it cannot, this hospital is carrying malpractice exposure on every procedure she has performed for the last 4 years." He looked back at her, and something in his expression tightened, personal now instead of procedural. "I have watched a surgeon cut corners before. I watched one kill a patient in this hospital 9 years ago, because nobody checked his residency completion date until it was too late. I am not going to let that happen again on my watch, no matter how good your outcomes look on paper." Wren understood, in that moment, That Ashcom wasn't cruel. He was frightened in the specific, righteous way of a man who has one scar and has decided the whole world is shaped like the thing that made it. That understanding didn't make the next part any easier. "Mr. Chairman," she said, "I'm asking you formally to table this hearing and let me contact my former command for a records release. It can take." Command. Ashcom seized the word instantly, the way a man seizes a loose thread. "You said command, Dr. Kessler. Not program, not institution. Command." He looked around the table, gathering the room's attention like a man closing a case. That's an interesting word choice for someone doing a civilian medical fellowship. Wren said nothing. Saying nothing had always been safer than saying something wrong. "I'll take that as confirmation that there's more to this story than what's in your file," Ashcom said. "And I'll be honest with you, Doctor, since you've chosen not to be honest with me. This committee has the authority to suspend your privileges pending verification. And given the exposure this hospital is carrying, I intend to recommend exactly that. Effective today." He closed the folder. "You can reapply once you're able to produce documentation this committee can actually verify. Until then, you will not be operating in this building. Mr. Chairman, I have a patient in recovery from a bowel resection I performed 6 hours ago. I am the attending of record. Then I suggest you hand off her care to another surgeon before you leave the building," Ashcom said, not unkindly, which somehow made it worse. "That's not cruelty, Doctor. That's process. Process is the only thing standing between this hospital and a courtroom." The hospital attorney was already sliding a suspension letter across the table. Wren looked at it without picking it up. "There's something you should understand before you sign that," she said quietly. 26 months is a long time to disappear from a paper trail. It's not a long time to disappear from people who were there. Ashcom's jaw tightened. "Is that a threat, Doctor?" "It's a fact," Wren said. "You're about to find out how many people were there." The suspension was formalized within the hour. By early afternoon, word had moved through Ridgeline Memorial the way word always moves through a hospital. Fast, distorted, half-true. Dr. Kessler's credentials didn't check out. Dr. Kessler was under investigation. Dr. Kessler might have been operating on people for years without a real fellowship behind her. The nurses who'd worked with her for 4 years didn't believe it. Not really, but disbelief doesn't stop a rumor. It just slows it down. Ashcom scheduled the follow-up session for 4 o'clock. A smaller, procedural meeting to formally document the suspension and route her active patients to other attendings. He arrived early, the way he always did, and found the conference room already occupied. A man in a gray suit was standing at the window, hands clasped behind his back, looking out at the parking lot with the patience of someone who had learned to wait in worse places than this. He was maybe 50, built like someone who had once run marathons and had simply never stopped moving with purpose. When Ashcom entered, the man turned, unhurried. "Mr. Ashcom," he said. "It wasn't a question. Can I help you? This is a closed credentialing session. I'm aware." The man crossed the room and extended a hand. "Colonel Marcus Webb, United States Navy. Retired. I was the operations officer for a task force Dr. Kessler served with. I'd like 10 minutes before you finalize anything." Ashcom shook the hand slowly, recalibrating. "Colonel, I'm not sure what a Navy officer has to do with a hospital credentialing matter." "I think you're about to find out," Webb said, and took a seat without being asked, which told Ashcom something about the kind of man he was dealing with before either of them said another word. The escalation began quietly enough that Ashcom nearly mistook it for nothing at all. The first sign came from Webb's phone. Sitting face up on the table, when a message lit the screen from a contact saved simply as Command Group. Webb didn't touch it. He let it sit there, glowing, until Ashcom's eyes drifted to it on their own. "You'll forgive me if that's not compelling on its own," Ashcom said. "A contact name in a phone isn't documentation." "No." Webb agreed. "It isn't. Give me a moment." The second sign arrived 12 minutes later, when the hospital's front security desk called up to say there were several vehicles in the visitor lot that weren't checking in as visitors. Black SUVs. Government plates, parked in a loose perimeter rather than a row. Ashcom took the call himself, frowning at the phrasing. Several vehicles didn't check in. They simply arrived and waited. The third sign was the one that actually moved him. Webb's phone rang, an actual call this time, and he answered it with a single word, "Webb," and listened for 11 seconds before saying, "Copy, hold at the perimeter. This is a professional courtesy call, not an extraction." He hung up and looked at Ashcom with an expression that had gone, very slightly, apologetic. "I need you to understand something before this goes further, Mr. Ashcom," Webb said. "What I'm about to tell you is going to sound like an exaggeration. It isn't. I need you to hold your questions until I'm finished, because some of what I'm going to say involves things I am only cleared to discuss in the broadest possible terms, and I will not be able to elaborate no matter how many times you ask. Colonel, with respect, I have a hospital to run. You have a surgeon you suspended 4 hours ago whose full record, if it existed on paper the way you want it to, would require a security clearance most people in this building will never hold." Webb said. His voice hadn't risen at all, which made it land harder than shouting would have. "It doesn't exist on paper because paper is the wrong place to keep it." Ashcom folded his arms. "Then tell me where the right place is." "The right place," Webb said, "is 40 kilometers outside a compound whose name I'm not going to say out loud in a room with a window at 0300 hours 4 years ago, when a joint operations team took contact from a position we hadn't mapped and had 2 men down with wounds neither one of them should have survived." He let that settle. Dark Kessler wasn't there as a fellow observing a program, Mr. Ashcom. She was there as our surgeon, forward deployed, attached to a naval special warfare element, operating outside the wire, doing trauma work in conditions that don't have a civilian equivalent. Under a task force designation, I'm not authorized to name in an unsecured hospital conference room. The room had gone very quiet. "That's..." Ashcom started and stopped, because he genuinely didn't have the next word ready. "That's why Landstuhl has no record of her." Webb continued. "Because she was never enrolled at Landstuhl in the way your paperwork assumes. Landstuhl was the covered designation for a fellowship that ran entirely inside classified operational medicine, sponsored jointly by 2 commands I'm not going to name for you today, and reviewed by exactly the kind of oversight body you're trying to replicate right now with a printed page and a phone call to a records office that was never authorized to confirm or deny anything to you in the first place. You expect me to accept that on your word?" "No," Webb said. "I expect you to accept it on hers once she's finished doing what she's doing right now, which is why I asked for 10 minutes before you finalized anything. Because Dr. Kessler isn't in this building anymore, Mr. Ashcom. She left an hour ago to hand off her patient the way you told her to." "Then where is she?" Webb's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it, and for the first time, Something that might have been the beginning of a smile moved at the corner of his mouth. "She's in your parking lot," Webb said, getting a full trauma kit out of the back of one of those vehicles you were just asking your security desk about. Because a call came in 9 minutes ago that this hospital's emergency department did not have the surgical capacity to handle. He stood, buttoning his jacket. "You suspended your most qualified trauma surgeon this afternoon, Mr. Ashcombe. I'd suggest you come see what that's actually costing you." Ashcombe followed him down the stairwell rather than wait for the elevator. Some old instinct telling him the elevator would be too slow for whatever this was. They came out through the ground floor corridor into a scene that stopped him cold. The ambulance bay had 2 units backed in, doors thrown open, and a knot of ED staff working over a gurney with the particular controlled panic of a mass casualty call that had arrived faster than the department could fully absorb. A charter bus carrying a youth wrestling team had rolled on the interstate 2 exits north. 6 patients incoming, 2 of them critical. And Ridgelines on. Call trauma attending was 40 minutes out, stuck behind the very accident that had generated the patients. And standing in the middle of the bay, already gloved, already gowned, a headlamp strapped over her hair because the overhead lighting rig was still being wheeled into position, was Renata Kessler. "Talk to me," she was saying to a resident, her voice flat and fast in a way Ashcombe had never heard from her in a boardroom. "Vitals. BP's 82/50, heart rate 140, he's got a rigid abdomen and he's decompensating," the resident said. "Trauma bay 2, now. I need fast ultrasound on him before he crashes," Wren said, already moving. Already peeling back a blanket to look at the boy's abdomen with hands that didn't hesitate. "Someone get me 2 units O, Nedge hanging and call the blood bank for 4 more. Tell them this isn't a drill." She glanced at a second gurney, where a girl was crying, clutching her arm. "That one's an open fracture. Splint and X-ray. She can wait 90 seconds, this one can't." She was already moving toward the first boy, snapping a headlamp beam down onto his abdomen. "I need a scalpel, and I need this room clear of anyone who isn't holding something useful." It took Ashcombe a moment to understand what he was watching. It wasn't a nurse following protocol or a resident working from a checklist. It was someone triaging 6 patients in real time with the calm, total authority of a person who had done this exact thing under conditions infinitely worse than a hospital bay, with clean lights and a functioning blood bank. She wasn't asking permission. She wasn't waiting for a chart. She was operating from a level of instinct that couldn't be faked, and couldn't, he understood now with a sinking, sick clarity, be produced by a R.A. Some that lied. "She's not credentialed to be in this building," the hospital attorney said weakly, jogging up beside him. "She's not credentialed," Ashcombe said slowly, watching Wren's hands move with total certainty into the boy's abdomen, finding the bleed before the ultrasound tech had even finished the scan. "Because we made the mistake of asking a peacetime records office to verify a wartime record." He didn't look away from the bay. "Get her privileges reinstated. Now, verbally on my authority, and we'll paper it after." "On what grounds?" "On the grounds," Ashcombe said, "that I am watching a naval special warfare surgeon save a 16-year-old boy's life in my parking lot. And I am not going to be the man who let him die because I preferred paperwork to the truth." Connell Webb, standing a few feet away, said nothing at all. He didn't need to. 20 minutes later, the boy was stable and rolling toward the OR, and Wren finally straightened up. Stripping off blood, slick gloves, the adrenaline starting to bleed out of her shoulders the way it always did afterward, in the quiet after. She turned and found Ashcombe standing at the edge of the bay, watching her, his suspension letter nowhere in sight. "Dr. Kessler," he said. "Mr. Chairman." Her voice was tired, professional, guarded in a way that told him exactly how much damage the afternoon had already done. He didn't reach for procedure this time. "I owe you an apology, and I'm aware an apology doesn't undo a suspension letter with your name on it in front of your entire board." "No." Wren agreed. "It doesn't. I built my career on the belief that unverifiable is the same thing as untrue," Ashcombe said. "I watched a man kill a patient in this hospital 9 years ago because someone lied on paper and nobody checked. I have spent every year since trying to make sure that never happens again on my watch. And today I nearly cost this hospital its best trauma surgeon because I couldn't imagine a version of the truth that a phone call to a records office wasn't built to hold." He looked down at his own hands for a moment. "That's not an excuse. It's just the shape of the mistake." "You were doing your job," Wren said, and she meant it, which surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "You just didn't have the clearance to see the parts of my file that would have told you I was doing mine." Colonel Webb tells me there's a records release process that can get at least a summary into your file, enough to satisfy an insurer without compromising anything classified. There is. It usually takes a request from someone the Navy actually wants to help. She glanced toward Webb, who was watching the exchange with the faint, contained satisfaction of a man who had made exactly the phone calls he'd intended to make. "I take it that's been handled." "It has," Webb confirmed. Ashcombe extended his hand. It was a small gesture, an ordinary one, but the way he held it out, steady, unhurried, waiting without demanding, told Wren he understood. It wasn't owed to him to have it accepted. She shook it anyway. "For what it's worth," Ashcombe said, "I would like the record to reflect that this committee formally withdraws the suspension, effective immediately, and that I intend to personally sponsor a review of our verification process for personnel with classified service records, so that no other surgeon in this hospital is ever asked to prove 26 months of saving lives to a man holding a phone number for the wrong records office." "I'd like that," Wren said. And then, because the adrenaline was fully gone now, and what was left underneath, it was simply exhaustion, she added, "I'd also like to go check on that boy's abdomen one more time before I go home." "Go," Ashcombe said. "Go be the surgeon we should have trusted from the start." She went. 6 weeks later, Ridgeline Memorial's credentialing office quietly adopted a new protocol for verifying classified military service records, developed in consultation with the Department of the Navy, a process that let commanding officers confirm service and competency without disclosing operational details, so that no future hearing would mistake a redacted record for a false one. Renata Kessler kept operating the way she always had, unhurried and exact, the fastest hands in the building on the nights that mattered most. She never talked about the 26 months, and nobody who mattered ever asked her to again. But sometimes, late in a shift, a nurse would catch her glance at a headlamp hanging by the door of Trauma Bay 2, and something in her expression would go somewhere else entirely for just a moment before she picked up the next chart and got back to work.